Hello. Before we start this episode, just a quick update. We reference European Act in this as coming into effect mid-2024. The actual effective date is mid-2025. So minor correction. Hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening to the Replatform podcast, sponsored by Crownpeak and Elastic Path and hosted by me, James Gedd and Paul Rogers. We put a lot of time and effort into bringing you interesting guests, thought leadership and fun podcasts. And we do all that for free. Help us keep it that way. Let other people you know about the podcast so we get more listeners. Share our posts that we put out on LinkedIn and Twitter to amplify our reach. And the best thing you can do if you haven't already is rate the show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you might be listening. So thanks, and let's set up our latest episode and introduce you to our guests. So we're focusing in on selecting the right CMS model for your e-commerce business and understanding some of the considerations around headless, non-headless CMS. And we're really happy today to have someone who's got a massive amount of experience and knowledge in this area. So Andreas Knorr, who's the Chief Product Officer at Crownpeak and MD in Germany. So welcome to the podcast, Andreas.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, really looking forward to this because I know you do a lot of work around the product strategy piece. So before we start getting into the questions around the CMS tool, could you give people a bit of an introduction? So who you are, what you do, and also for those who don't know Crownpeak from that CMS point of view, like what is Crownpeak and where does it sit in the market?
Yeah, sure. I'm Andreas, Chief Product Officer at Crownpeak. That means I'm responsible for the product strategy and product roadmap aspects for the full portfolio. Crownpeak is a digital experience platform vendor, so we are focusing on creating digital experiences, optimizing digital experiences, and quality checking digital experiences. So there's a whole portfolio around that. We have multiple products. Content management is one of the products in the portfolio. And looking forward to the discussion today.
Excellent. And so we're going to cover kind of two core topic areas. So the first one is going to be understanding CMS models and what Crownpeak provides, because I think this is really interesting. Because I know when we were talking about doing this episode, you'd reference about sometimes people not really understanding what having a headless CMS really entails and whether you need it. So that's really cool. Then we're going to go into Crownpeak CMS offering and specific capabilities to get that additional product context. So Paul, do you want to kick off on the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, the first area is quite topical for us as well. We've obviously been working on a joint project and some of this has come up. But first question for you, Andreas. So why should e-com and content teams understand the different models behind different CMSs? And why is it important before you start assessing and comparing vendors?
Yeah, that's a good question because it's actually a technical topic, and the good question here is why should I care, right? So there are, I think, two main models out there that people should be aware of. There's one way of integrating content and commerce, and that is doing this in a very deeply integrated native way. And the other option is more, let's say, decoupled way of doing this, which is also assigned with this headless terminology. Both aspects or both models here work quite differently from a technical perspective. The end user probably won't see the difference here. So it's more something where, let's say, architects need to make a decision. What kind of integration do I actually need, and what kind of integration do I want from a requirement perspective? So that means it's a discussion that we are typically having with solution architects, for example, on the customer side. And it's sometimes some educational sessions are necessary to actually describe what is the difference between the two models and why do I have to make a decision, or is there even a hybrid solution available that fits the needs?
Great. So that takes me nicely onto my next question, which is which CMS models do Crownpeak offer? And how does it differ for the e-com teams in terms of how they're actually using it? And then what level of technical skill is required for the different models?
Yeah. So at Crownpeak, we actually support both models that are just described. So we have integrations that are having a very technically deep integrations between content management and e-commerce systems. The overall goal, we haven't talked about that at all, is, right, why do I do that? Why do I integrate a content management system with an e-commerce system? Is people want to improve shopping experiences in a very specific way, in a more content-driven way, in a more story-driven way, right? That is the reason why people are actually doing this. Why should I invest in that kind of technology if there are a lot of companies trying to differentiate themselves from the competitors and from their competition? And that is actually using content-driven aspects here is a very successful model, because you know your product best, right? You know the story behind your products. So that is an asset that people more and more want to leverage if they want to improve their shopping experience.
No, yeah, Paul alludes to the fact that we're working on a project where actually there's a key decision around the CMS model, and we've definitely been seeing more demand and interest in the market for headless CMSs, which sometimes can be content teams not understanding how they can achieve business requirements within a non-headless. But sometimes actually there are valid reasons. So I'd love to hear from your point of view, because you do a lot, obviously Crownpeak works with a lot of different businesses across different verticals. Why are you seeing some businesses move towards headless CMS? Like, what does it enable them to do, and what challenges is it helping them solve?
Right. Yeah. Going headless or choosing a headless model, there are a couple of patterns that I see over and over again why people are doing that. One of the most important driver is more, let's say, business agility. So I want to have flexible models. I want to have the opportunity to switch different aspects of my technology stack more easily. And that means the more decoupled the systems are, the easier it is, right? So, for example, if I don't like the front-end technology of my e-commerce shop because it's outdated, for example, do I need to change the whole technology stack, or can I just replace the single component that I don't like, the front-end aspect of it, for example? So headless enables people to have a combination of tools that can be integrated in a decoupled way that enables them to make changes in their technology stack without the necessity of a full replatforming exercise. That is a very strong driver for headless. So it's more business agility to change specific parts of the stack.
Crownpeak, enabling organizations to build meaningful digital experiences for everyone, everywhere. Engage your customers with our content management system, reach your entire audience with our digital accessibility and quality tools, and grow your brand with our product discovery solution. Find out more at crownpeak.com.
Yeah, the thing that we're also seeing is I guess the challenge of businesses, if they're adapting into a headless, to understand whether that's something that they need specific technical resource in-house. So what do you typically see when people are moving towards that headless model? Do they typically enhance their front-end UX development team in-house to be able to self-serve? Or do you see more people go down the route where the agency they're working for is managing entirely that headless implementation and the ongoing any coding work that's required?
Yeah. So the technical implementation, if you look at the headless models and all the advantages that come with the headless models, there is some cost to it as well. And that is, it actually requires quite some technical understanding and actually requires quite some technical skills and knowledge. The question, is that something for an in-house team, or is that something for an external agency, for example? That is a case-by-case decision and highly depends on the digital maturity of the business, right? So there are customers that really want to do this in-house because they want to own the knowledge, and that is the most efficient way for them to do that. That applies to the bigger ones. That is what I've seen in the market. So smaller smaller companies are more trying to use external agencies to get this knowledge that is required here, because they don't have the mature internal development teams that are required for implementing an headless model.
And then one of the other education pieces I think is really interesting to chat about is what limitation or challenge you've seen when a business like a content team and a marketing team goes purely headless from having not used headless CMSs before. What are some of the things they need to be thinking about, some of the process changes that they need to be aware of?
Yeah, that's a good question. In general, the promise of headless content management, if we focus on the content management part for a second, the promise here is it's a content model that is decoupled from where the content is being consumed, right? So you can use the same piece of content on a website. You can use the same piece of content in a mobile channel. You can use the same piece of content in an email, for example. So fulfilling this multi-channel, omni-channel promise here is one driver for the headless topic. That all sounds great, and that is good. But what people often underestimate is managing a content model that can be used anywhere in any kind of context is quite challenging, because you don't see the result, right? Yeah, you're managing your content and you're creating, articles and blog posts and what have you, or smaller fragments of content that then is being used somewhere. But very often in a pure headless environment, the marketing team is not able to see how does it look like on my website, for example. How does it look like on my website if I'm using a tablet, for example? So this, what you see is what you get. Experience that you used to have in a more traditional content management environment suddenly is gone. And that is really a challenge for a lot of people, because their workflow depends on this visual representation of, or this visual double checking, is everything right for my specific channel? That is something that needs to be considered. How can I get back my what you see is what you get experience from an editorial perspective?
Great. And I think that, again, touches on the next question a little bit. So how do you think businesses should be approaching this? Like, as business users, let's say they have the technical capability in-house and they're going through a project that involves CMS. Like, what questions do you think they should be asking when they're looking to make this decision? And I guess that's a really good example. If, a team is used to working in one way where they can visually see what they're building, alongside that, what other questions should they be thinking about?
Right. Yeah, I think deciding for the right model, should I go headless, yes or no? That always needs to be a case by case decision, because sometimes it's more, let's say, efficient to not use a headless model, right? So headless is not any kind of silver bullet where it solves every problem that you have in content management, for example. No, that's not the case, right? So you have to really make an active decision. Okay, that is a use case where headless is really helpful, and this is a different use case where a more traditional approach would be more cost efficient or easier for the business user, for example. So, and the bigger the company is, the more hybrid models I see. We use headless in this specific use case, but let's say more traditional deployment models in another use case, and that's totally fine. So as long as you can manage the complexity, and as long as you don't have 10 tools to manage 10 different output channels, that is a very valid approach to say I'm choosing the right content model for the right use case.
Elastic Path is on a mission to break through the barriers that prevent commerce leaders from delivering extraordinary shopping experiences. Both business and tech teams are able to innovate on their own terms, fully embrace composability, and in turn, never compromise on what's possible. Learn more at www.elasticpath.com.
Let's lean with that context, that kind of market context, which I think is important, because we always say when we're encouraging people to think about, what platforms to look at, is think about your model first. I think that's always a starting point. Same with e-commerce platforms. If you don't understand what model and what operational capability you want, it's very hard to then assess the individual solutions. So with that in mind, let's drill a bit more into Crownpeak specific capabilities. So let's start on the integration bit. So what leading e-commerce platforms and ecosystems is Crownpeak CMS most connected with? Which ones do you play well with, have existing sites integrated with?
Yeah, we have standard integration with all the big relevant players in the market. So I don't know, Salesforce, for example, Ecommerce, Shopify, Spryker, and there are more. So we have out-of-the-box integrations into all the relevant e-commerce vendors. And I think the important part here is how hard is it to add a new one if you have a solution that's not on the list. That's also, I think, a strength of our platform. It's very easy to add an integration into new e-commerce system without spending a lot of money and time to do this, because the general pattern, what is required, what functionality do I need, that's always the same, right? How do I do the preview, for example? How do I do my workflow? How do I do my time scheduling? How do I do my personalization, for example? That is an ongoing and repeating pattern. So we have some kind of e-commerce framework that is covering all this common ground, and there's very specific parts. I don't know, how do I get specific product information from the e-commerce platform into the CMS? That is part of the native integration that I just explained.
And just on that, so can you just talk us through what the native integration looks like? Is it a case of if you were doing a Shopify implementation, do you essentially have your own pre-built connector, and then you would need to go through the process of kind of architecting out, how you're actually going to build the models? I'm just thinking, because our listeners are at kind of various levels from a technical perspective. We have a lot of people on Shopify in particular. It'd be interesting to just understand what the average integration looks like, kind of end to end, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if you think about, if the goal is you want to create a great shopping experience, let's say you want to modify the homepage of your shop, right? And what do you need? Maybe some promotional content, maybe some editorial choices for, I want to promote this specific product here, and I want to provide a video for this specific product here. So if you're trying to imagine the process of, I want to create a very specific new experience, what do I need as an author, as an editor, for example, right? So yeah, I need content management functionality. Sure, I need some kind of preview capability. How does it look like in the shop? But you also need access to the product catalog, for example, because you want to do a promotion, and then how do I get to the right product here? So an integration into the product catalog is key. So, and that is part of this kind of native integration. Can I get all the products that I need from Ecommerce or Shopify, for example? That is part of the standard connectors that we have between CMS and the e-commerce systems.
Yeah, I think that's such an important one, the integration of the product catalog, because the number of times people want to do components which are commerce and content blended, which become more challenging if you've purely got a content view. So that's interesting. Question I've got, so one of the things that I always come up against with content teams when they're looking at native page builders, so I'm talking about a platform that's got its own page builder, whether that's a BigCommerce, Adobe. I mean, they all have them to varying degrees of user interface capability. But the bit that most of them fall down on is scheduling and publishing. So you might be able to set something up and publish it at a specific date, but if there's no workflow, you can't do more complex scheduling in advance for multiple content components, which restricts the content team's ability to operate, because it's if somebody's not going to be in on the date where they have to publish it, it then makes it more difficult. I'd love you to talk us through what does Crownpeak enable? Like how deep can you get in terms of workflow for pushing content to somebody to preview, for somebody else to then authorize to publish, versus that scheduling it across different like locations at different times. So yeah, can you give us a walkthrough of that, please?
Sure. Yeah, I think the important part here is, scheduling of content. That is something you do in a kind of campaign management way, right? So you're thinking through your campaigns, what kind of content should be appear when and to whom. So it's typically a combination of scheduling on one side and, let's say, permission-based publishing or personalization for a specific target group. So it's a combination of time control and permissions, actually. Of course, you want to do this upfront, right? You want to plan this for the next week or the next month, for example. And what our content model allows is you can predefine all that at any given time and say, okay, this content gets specific target group. This piece of content gets a specific scheduling information. Should only appear on Monday, but should go away on Friday again. And then that is being processed by the e-commerce platform. So you just define it, you push it over, and then you are done from an editorial perspective. The rest is happening as some kind of background logic in conjunction with the e-commerce platform.
One of the biggest use cases, I guess, that we've seen and used ourselves for an external CMS or like an independent CMS is where a business either already has multiple instances across the platform or multiple locales and markets, and there's a limitation within the e-com platform, or they're looking to expand into new markets. And they want to be able to not just manage content globally, but also essentially have different levels where you can use certain fields globally or certain content globally, but then also kind of override a local level. Is this a common use case that you see, and how do you allow your users to kind of scale globally?
Absolutely. A very common use case for most of our customers, actually. We typically have customers that are operating on a global basis. So multiple brands in multiple locations with multiple languages, right? And there are different models of how can I actually publish and distribute content over multiple brands across multiple countries, for example. And it needs to be some kind of workflow-driven component to it as well, because sometimes, I don't know, there are content pieces that are mandatory, so it's being forced to into a specific country. But sometimes it's more like a subscription. Yes, you can get the piece of content, but it's optional. Do I want to use it? Yes or no. So you have local workflows within a department, for example. You have local workflows where you can make the decision, okay, new piece of content had been provided to me. That's great. What's required? Do I take it as it is? Do I need to do local translation because maybe only the English version has been provided, but I need something in French now. So, and that is not a service that has been provided on a corporate level. So local translation is a very, very common use case, or local variations, depending on what kind of country you are in. Not all products make sense, right? Not all pieces of content make sense in a specific country. So this model where we have a pool of content that can be shared across multiple brands, across multiple countries, but you have local decisions. Do I use it? Do I translate it? Do I modify it? That is a very, very common use case. And what's required is a workflow engine that supports this kind of hierarchical content model with the possibility of local modifications.
Great, lovely. And I'm changing the next question because it's very similar to the other one. You've already answered it. So when I was going through your website, one of the things that I thought was interesting was the kind of testing and personalization side. And I think both James and I have evaluated a lot of traditional headless CMSs recently, which are, really impressive, really good at managing data, but maybe don't have some of those features. So can you talk us through how the offering there works and how integrated it is with the content management side?
Yeah, that's an interesting aspect. So the personalization, we talked about headless a lot and we talked about decoupled a lot. I think the same applies to the content management and the personalization aspect. So a lot of more traditional vendors have this baked in as one solution, which makes it very hard if you want to use it in a headless way, for example. That means you actually need a solution where the personalization aspect is decoupled from the content management aspect, right? And that if you have that foundation, it's actually pretty easy to have different personalization algorithms, for example, on different touch points, or use it in a headless or non-headless way, or in a combination. So from an architecture perspective, the flexibility to have a very highly decoupled content engine and a very high decoupled personalization engine, I think, is key the more omni-channel use cases you have.
And another angle of the platform that is definitely of interest is around accessibility, because I definitely see more people asking questions when they're doing selections around e-commerce platforms about accessibility, especially with high-profile cases in the US around ADA and people getting hands slapped and fines. But equally, you've got to think as a brand, you've got to think about the whole ecosystem of the different technologies you're plugging in. And I know that Crownpeak's got a kind of key offering in the accessibility space. Can you talk people through like what is the accessibility capabilities and how are those baked into the CMS as well?
Yeah, I think that's a super interesting topic, and it's getting more traction. It used to be more an afterthought for a lot of people thinking about accessibility, and there hasn't been a lot of investments in the past, depending on the company or the brand. But I think that will change pretty soon, because accessibility is getting more and more relevant for a lot of people globally. Actually, the reasons are different from region to region. If you think about the US, it's about not getting sued, right? So that is a very strong motivator there. And if you think about Europe, it's more upcoming regulations. So, for example, the European Accessibility Act that is more or less forcing everyone to have an accessible website by mid 2024, which is not a lot of time left to work on that. That is really something that is creating a lot of activity at the moment. And of course, it is the right thing to do, because if you think about the number of people with some temporary or permanent accessibility issue, we're talking about a big group of people. So in the e-commerce space, if your website, if your checkout process, for example, is not accessible, you're losing money, because people go somewhere else where people did a better job. If the shopping cart is not available, just using the keyboard and not the mouse, for example, because people have some kind of issues there, that is something that actually you can't afford anymore nowadays. And for good reasons, regulations are coming up that tries to introduce that concept to actually every website. So that is something where we see a lot of potential in the future. And the combination of course, content management and e-commerce and accessibility, that absolutely makes sense, because you want to have an accessible online shopping experience for sure. And that sometimes means, okay, I need to regularly check, is everything accessible? Yes or no? I need to have a tool that is doing that for me. I need to have notifications if I introduce something new and then suddenly accessibility is bad, I need to know that. And then the question is, how do I fix these issues, right? A couple of issues might be content related. For example, an image should have an alt tag so that people with a screen reader can get an idea what does the product look like. That is more content-driven aspect of accessibility. But there, of course, are technical issues as well, right? Can I reach the navigation or the categories in my online shop just using the keyboard? Yes or no? It's just try it. It's easy, right? Open a website, press the tab key, and see if you're able to navigate within your website without using the mouse. And you will be surprised. A lot of websites, they just don't support that, and that needs to be changed.
And in terms of, so what I think people will be interested to hear next is what does Crownpeak, because we're focusing on the CMS, and I know accessibility is like a product alongside like all the other ones. How does it work in the CMS world? What does the CMS automatically do to create accessible code? Because it's obviously people are creating content and that's spitting out the code to push into websites. So what does Crownpeak do automatically versus what sort of alerts does it give people where they then need to go and take action themselves? Be useful to get a few examples.
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's a tight integration between the accessibility component and the content management component. And if you think about an editorial workflow, okay, I'm creating a new landing page for a specific product, for example, I need to be aware of a couple of things. So there are guidelines out there, what web accessibility guidelines out there. What do I need to ensure, right? So I already mentioned, okay, you should have a headline for every page, for example. You should have an alt tag for every image. There should be a description for every video. The headline shouldn't be too short, but should also not be too long, for example. If people have problems reading complex text, for example. So there are a lot of rules out there that are, let's say, are general rules regarding web accessibility, but you also might have rules that are very specific for your brand. So that's also actually a scaling topic. Can I create my own rule sets on top of that? And if all the rule sets have been defined, then in the editorial process, you create something new, and then the system tells you, hey, this image has no alt tag, and this headline is too long. I won't publish that until you fix this problem. So there's an automated check running in the background that ensures that nothing is getting published that does not meet your accessibility requirements.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really nice feature. More like e-com solutions should have that in place, really, because I think it's such an important topic, and we've had so many clients that have had issues. So yeah, I think that's really good. Final question, and a big one. So what is coming next in your roadmap? So you've obviously got quite a broad portfolio of solutions. Like, you plan on introducing any more, or kind of, where are areas that you're looking to double down on or strengthen over the next kind of 6, 12, 18 months?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's quite a long list of options there. So integrations, we talked about that a lot today. Integration is still a key focus for the roadmap. So having more out-of-the-box integrations available into different systems. The really big topic at the moment is, not a surprise, I guess, artificial intelligence. How can that be applied to specific use cases? So if we take the example that we just mentioned, I'm creating a landing page, and then my accessibility checker tells me, oh, the headline is way too long here. Please fix that. That is something that generative AI tools actually can do automatically pretty well nowadays. So I can use the machine here. I can use AI services that are directly embedded into the content management or the accessibility tool to fix these content-driven issues, for example. If I need a description for a specific image, yes, of course, I can create that manually, or I can just ask the tool. The tool knows, okay, there's a picture description missing. Please create a good description between 3 and 5 words that is describing what's actually in the picture. And the AI models are good enough to do that at the moment. And that's nice and easy if you just do it for one page. But think more about scaling. You have 10,000s of issues on your website. The technology is able to fix this as a bulk operation. And please create all the missing 10,000 image descriptions for me. So that is really boosting efficiency where you can apply good AI services in conjunction with content management, in conjunction with e-commerce shops, or in conjunction with accessibility.
Yeah, that's not. It's amazing how, I mean, AI has been around for ages, but it's amazing how it's just suddenly loads of people from a demand point have woken up to the expectation that they should be getting this out of the tooling they're investing in. It's really interesting to see vendors like yourself building this into tools, because it's happening in other areas of the e-com stack, whether that's on SEO tooling, whether it's on search and merch tooling, and people adding more and more in. Interesting is going to be watch the next 12, 18 months and see how far it gets.
Absolutely.
Well, that's the end of the questions. Thanks so much for taking time, Andreas. If anyone wants to probe further around the capabilities of Crownpeak CMS specifically, like in the context of their business needs, who can they reach out to at Crownpeak?
Well, all relevant information are on the website, as always, crownpeak.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to answer all the questions that you have. Excellent.
Thanks so much. And we'll keep a keen eye out for the latest developments on the roadmap. So thanks for joining us, and thanks to everyone as always for listening. Hope you found it useful. Do reach out to Andreas via LinkedIn if you've got any more questions or any technical questions specific to the areas we covered. And keep your ear open for the next episode. We drop one every week. And don't forget before you go to give us that rating on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you may be listening. Thanks very much. For more information on this topic, head over to replatform.fm for our audio podcasts. To discuss a project, or if you'd like to chat about any of the topics covered in this episode in more detail, please reach out to myself, James Gerd, or my co-host, Paul Rogers, via LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks again for listening, and keep your ears peeled for the next episode.